So as we kind of as we reflect on this, in a sense, and it's an interesting question that sometimes we don't often ask, because we just kind of, I know for myself, when I kind of got into psychology, it was straight into the idea that I have to go out there with this kind of metaphoric magnifying glass, and with every client that would come, I had the DSM in my head, and the DSM was kind of like you could say it was sort of like a filter, in a sense. And so as a client would come, I would have this big filter, and I would ask questions and ask questions, and until I would come to, the end, and I knew, and kind of like, was it GAD, was it OCD, or was it a substance use disorder, was it GAD with a substance use? And I was had these kind of you could say syndromes, in my mind, because I knew that if I could find the syndrome, I was taught the protocols. In other words, if I could find that this was depression, I knew the protocols to treat depression. I was taught CBT. So for example, I'd know that if this is depression, then I have to do a case formulation followed by a thought monitoring, cognitive restructuring, behavioral activation, maybe some behavioral experiments, and continue on that path up till relapse prevention. And that was sort of what I'd do. And so this is kind of the let's call this the protocols for syndromes approach. This is sort of the approach that many, or much of therapy in general, in a sense, is kind of focused on the idea that here are the syndromes and here's how to treat it. Almost like prescriptions, psychological therapy prescriptions for disease. Give you a moment to just reflect on what we've talked about here and try and join the dots. Sorry, you can't see the GAD behaviors in this slide because the video's in the way, but obviously you remember it's basically pervasive worrying, problem solving, ways to control stuff that could go wrong in the future. You kind of see something here which is a kind of a conceptual kind of sense of what is bad, in a way, what is threatening. In PTSD, the memories; in OCD, the unwanted experience, whatever that is, the thing that they don't want to happening is the intrusive thought. In panic, what's bad is the actual body, losing control or having a panic attack. And in GAD, it's the doubts, the worries of things that could go wrong, and the behavior in all cases comes in to solve it, in a sense. It makes rational sense, doesn't it? If the body kind of experiencing a flutter in your heart or something like that is a sign that you're going to die, and it makes sense to avoid that at all costs. And there's a little analogy I like from the ACT community, which sort of says, the mind comes in and it does what's logical, rational, and 100% pathological all at the same time. And it's sort of an analogy sometimes I use with clients, which is that, imagine you go and you got this glass and you're thirsty, so you go and fill that glass up, and you fill it up and you go to drink, and you're thirsty, but about, that moment you're about to drink, and let's just say at that moment the glass slips out and it breaks all over the floor and it cuts your foot. It's one of those heavy glasses. It bang, hurts your foot, it cuts, it breaks everywhere, and it hurts. And then your mind says, that was bad. From now on, no more liquids. Now that solves the problem of ever getting your foot cut. Yeah, it solves the problem, because the threat became the cup. The threat became the glass full of water. And the issue is in this analogy, obviously the mind did what was rational, logical, and it will also kill you if you followed that. If you don't drink any more liquids for the rest of your life, you don't survive very long, I don't believe. So we kind of have this dilemma of the mind bringing solutions. I'm going to talk about that a bit later. But here I just want to look at these different disorders that we've just covered. We've gone through one after the other for a few minutes now. And we see, anorexia looks different to social anxiety, looks different to PTSD or OCD and the others. But you kind of see that they share something, don't they? They share something here. They share that all that's different, what's changing is the content. But what's the same is the process. As in, what's changing is the content of what the person finds threatening, in a sense. So in PTSD, it's a memory. In anorexia, it's body image and getting overweight. In panic disorder, it's the physiological experience, right? It's the body. It's the body's, it changes. The threat changes, but the process of attributing and conceptualizing a threat is the same. the behavior changes as well. PTSD avoiding a memory is very different to restricting eating, which is very different to not going somewhere where escape might be difficult, which is very different to washing your hands. Behavior is very different in content, but in process of what the behaviors are doing, trying to alleviate and protect, solve the threat, that stays the same amongst all disorders.
And I wonder if we could start our talk today just with a word from you for individuals such as these who've been taught, normal fitting clients into DSM categories and applying the treatment models, and sort of what the future of making a difference looks like, in your view.
Boy, it's an awesome place to start, and thanks for the question. It also leads to quite a deep dive, and some of these things are things that are just becoming clearer to me. I mean, that little song that you talked about is linked to an analysis that hasn't even been fully yet put into print, and the things that I've been exploring, and the depth of it, the breadth of it, and the heft of it hasn't become clear to me even now, but I only really started opening up to what I think the situation is about 3.5 years ago. And it was in the process of trying to focus more on processes of change. So I'll try to answer your question in a way that doesn't lead to a 20-minute rant.
Okay.
But still gives a little bit of due attention to how bad the situation is.
Yeah.
Because I just have to say, evidence-based therapy, psychology, etc., has been in a deluded state, in my opinion, for almost its entire existence. Psychology itself, the first person ever to call himself a psychologist, Wundt, said very early on that we have more to learn from statistical average than from all the philosophers except Aristotle, which makes you chuckle a little bit. I don't know why I loved Aristotle so much, but I gave a talk recently called it Psychology's Original Sin. And the reason is that when psychology based what we do on the psychology of individual differences, that was never about individuals, but was about differences. He bought into an agenda that Galton and the early statisticians established for us with their bell curves and standard deviations, on the idea that your placement on those things predicted what would happen to you in your life. And just to give you a taste of the shock that I think the field should feel when they really dig into this, you have to understand that first place that was laid out was in Galton's book called Hereditary Genius, where he lays the foundation for eugenics.
Right.
Where he first says nature nurture, where he first claims that there's these big racial differences in intelligence. And this dirty history is almost unknown to psychology, and we're still living inside Galton's eugenic dreams. Because here's the fact. It's a mathematical fact that's almost unknown in psychology. I only became really aware of it about 3.5 years ago, as I said, that your placement on a bell curve does not predict your development over time, and will not, it'll never work. It's mathematically impossible. It's been proven and accepted in the physical sciences for almost 100 years, proposed for almost 120 years in a thing called the ergodic theorem. So we've been living inside a delusion that was established for racist purposes. And when you categorize people by normative top-down categories and you put it atop them and you say that is their future, you don't know it, but you're participating in a lie. And that is in psychometrics, it's in IQ testing, it's in personality testing, it's in the DSM, it's in the employment measures we use, it's in our educational placements, it's every freaking where, and it's wrong. So
it's sort of used to make a lot of decisions these days still, like whether you get funding for things and whatnot. It's the foundation.
It's everywhere. It's everywhere. And I mean, I can light my hair on fire, except I don't have any.